Good morning. We continue our journey in the conclusion and summary and review of Hemshech Ayin Beis. In volume 3, we are more or less the last leg on page 1463. To sum up, after 110 pages of an explanation of Hariyah, vision, basically the two levels of vision, the Etzem Koyach Hariyah, that's unlimited in the soul, and then the power of vision as the faculty of vision manifests within the Keli, within the eye, so too the soul itself is, at its core, doesn't have any limitations. However, it's rooted in Atzim, in Atzmus. But when it comes down below, it goes into Keli, into the body and the animal soul, and as such, it needs siyua, it needs light, outside light, to illuminate it and guide it to be able to reveal its tremendous potency and power. And that is the avodah of a neshama down lamata. And it's dafka in that darkness, shcheirani, that becomes v'nova, creates a tremendous thirst and longing and profound love and ava rabba and ava b'tainugim, lishtaba b'gufa demalka, to connect with the etzem itself, even higher than the neshama's b'nei Yerushalayim above. And the siyua, going from the bottom, the way we learned it was there's Torah that illuminates it, there's Ner Mitzvah, there's the Einei Ha'eda, the leaders, our teachers, our Sanhedrin, our teachers, our Rabbeim, and finally the Malachim are also called Einei Hashem, are a siyua that supports, which is why we say Birchas Yetzer about the Malachim before we say Shema. Because that prepares the animal soul, warms it up, so to speak, softens it up, preparing it to a Shema Yisrael, where the neshama, the nefesh halakis, educates and also harnesses the animal soul to believe Haftas Hashem lekecha b'chol levavcha b'shnei yitzarecha, to love God with both sides of the heart, Yetzer Tov, Yetzer Hara, Shnei Yitzarecha. And as I said, and dafka in this guf and nefesh habam is that the neshama itself is propelled and reveals its ultimate highest levels that is not revealed in the neshamas above in Bnei Yerushalayim, only below, due to the distance, as we learned at length. And with that, the Rebbe Rashab returns on page 1463. Obviously, there's a lot more details in these 110 pages, but I summed up the gist of it, that in page 1463, he continues now and says, Ma'at tzarech lahavin, what means Ner Hashem nishma sodom, and Ner Mitzvah, and he begins talking about Ner Hashem nishma sodom, that the Ner consists of the three things: the wick, the divine soul, entering into the body and the animal soul being the Shemen, the oil, and the oil then serves as fuel, the Nefesh Halakis, it converts that Shemen and turns it, instead of it following its own interest, as we'll soon learn, to become fuel for the Nefesh Halakis, for the Oir Eliki of the Neshama, or V'haftas Hashem lekecha b'chol levavcha b'shnei yitzarecha, as I mentioned, which again we'll learn soon more in detail. And that creates the Oir. So that's where we're up to. And then he began to explain what is Shemen. That why is Shemen connected to the animal soul, to the namely the seichel of the animal soul. So he begins a longer explanation that Shemen is the level of Chochma in general. And that's why there's Shemen in everything. There's fuel or oil in everything. Like there's Chochma, because Kulam b'Chochma Sisa, everything was created with Chochma. Bereshis, Bara, Bereshis b'Chuchmasa. So there's a kernel, a spark of the Nakuda, the fuel of Chochma within everything that exists. And he compared it to Bereshis, which is a Maimer Kloli, like Chochma, which is a Nakuda that encompasses everything that will come from it. And before the parentheses, he said, it's like Kamoy Koyach Hiuli. Kamoy Koyach Hiuli, Shemen Nimtza Kol Protei HaSeichel. Like a potential nucleus, or call it like a nebula, that everything is there in a concentrated form. But he calls it Koyach Hiuli. The parentheses addresses that point, whether it's a Koyach Hiuli or not. As I said on last class, I was not clear about it. Now I am. and I will give you my findings. I've read it slowly. I also found the sources earlier where he discussed it, so I was able to compare and look into it a little deeper. So that I'm going to do now. But before I do that, I wanted to add one more thing. In the 110 pages I just quickly reviewed, I wanted to add one more thing, which, I mean, it's among many things that's discussed. But one of the things the key thing that I wanted to mention was the issue of Golus. That the neshama, when it comes down below, it always needs siyua, but especially in Zman HaGolus. The whole discussion why Malachim play even a more central role. Moshe Rabbeinu didn't want to have a malach. He wanted straight access to Hashem to lead and guide us. But Yeshua did accept the malach because of the Yerida below. The Malachim play a central role as obviously ambassadors of Hashem. They have no power of their own, as he explained at length with Matat. Just wanted to add that because it's good to have in the summary. So that's a little addendum that I should have said before. Just wanted to throw it in there. So with that said, let me review the parentheses. I'll learn it inside actually, and it's quite clear when you read it slowly. And maybe Rav Shlomo already was machaven when he was explaining it on Friday, but I did not get it yet. So now I did. And here's what he says. I'm going to first sum up orally what the point is, and then we'll read it inside. So the Rebbe Rashab firstly brings, we just said it's a koyach Hiuli Chochma. So koyach Hiuli has certain features. One of the features of a koyach Hiuli is that it doesn't have details. It's only like a potential, I use the word archetype, I don't know if that's exactly the right way to put it. I'm trying to find something that is not, we're not talking about like a seed or one cell. That you can say, yes, you don't yet have a developed fetus in that one cell upon conception, but still, all the cells are in there in some concentrated form. Hiuli is the pratim are not there at all. It's like a power that God created. You know, keep in mind, it's hard for us sometimes to imagine because we live in a world of a tangible world of details. Everything has structure. You know, we see the tree, we don't see the seed. Now, when we think about it, the seed is what created this tree. So the seed has to have all the details. But when you think about it from Hashem's perspective, it's the other way around. There was nothing that existed altogether. Mamish nothing, ayin. So when he creates, first he creates a general, well, there's many levels, but I'll just go straight to Hiuli. First, he creates a Hiuli. A Hiuli is like a potential state, like somewhat like we learned earlier about the Esser spheres Sagnuzas before the Tzimtzum. So we learned they're not actually spheres. You can't even call them spheres. They are, you can say, concepts. They are archetypes. They are ideas. The idea of Chochma, the ability to have Chochma. However you explain it, it's not yet details. And then comes the next level, a klal, that's koil, all the pratim. So a klal can have, you can give a central point. Let's say a person's giving a speech or writing an article. They start with an executive summary. That's a central point. In it is included all the details, and then you say, okay, now I'm going to flesh it out. That's already a klal to a prat. So Hiuli is one step above that. It doesn't have pratim in it. So when you say Chochma is Hiuli, that would seem to suggest that it doesn't have details yet. And that's what the Rebbe Rashab is concerned with. Because earlier we learned that Hiuli is higher than Chochma, because Hiuli has no details, and Chochma does have details. So the Rebbe Rashab explains it in two ways, basically. First, he says that if you're going to say that Chochma is Hiuli, you can't be talking about Chochma itself. You have to be talking about Atzmus HaChochma. Because earlier we learned Chochma has details in it. You just can't discern the details. That's why you need Bina to flesh it out. But the Nekuda has details, which makes Chochma closer to the structure. Atzmus HaChochma, however, what he calls Koyach HaMaskil is the power to conceive ideas. It's like a child, or all of us are born with the power. You have the power to do things. The ability to do something does not include the details. I'll give you an example. When we say you have the power to write, my hand has the power to write. You can't say my hand already includes the details of everything I will write through my lifetime, a book or something. You could say you have the power to write, but I haven't yet even thought of what I'm going to write. So it's more of a Hiuli that everything that ever will be written will come from this Koyach HaKsiva. Or the same thing, Koyach HaDibur. Koyach HaDibur in the Hiuli state does not include a particular speech or particular conversation. It's the power to speak. So koyach hamaskil is the power to conceive. There you can call it koyach Hiuli, Atzmus Chochma. But Chochma itself is already what he said earlier, details. However, the Rebbe Rashab is not sufficient, does not suffice with that. And I'll explain the reason after I first explain what he says. Well, I'll explain the reason right now. The reason he doesn't suffice, my understanding is, and maybe I said this the first time we taught it, when I taught this as well, is because the Rebbe Rashab wants to make a deeper connection between Chochma and the details. Because remember, the whole theme of Ayin Beis is interface. Interface means the more you can connect the higher and the lower, the better it is. That's why you have the Das Tachten and Das Elyon, Yechude Tata, Yechude La. Because Yechude Tata, Das Tachten is on our terms. Yechude La is on God's terms. And then you join them both together. So if you say Chochma is a koyach Hiuli, and it has no connection to details, then in a way it's somewhat removed from the rest of the shtalshlus. When you say it has details, it's more connected, but then it doesn't have the intensity of the source as it would be a koyach Hiuli. So my understanding is why the Rebbe Rashab is trying to go further and say that Chochma is Hiuli, while it also has details, is to show that the interface is connected. Chochma has both aspects. On one hand, it reflects more keser, like Ein Sof. On the other hand, Chochma is also connected to details. So the first explanation is that's the difference in Atzmus Chochma, Koyach HaMaskil, which is essentially Chochma Stima and Keser, Chochma Shebe Keser, and Chochma itself. So Chochma Koyach HaMaskil, Atzmus HaChochma does not have details, Hiuli, and Chochma has details. But the Rebbe Rashab, as I said, does not suffice with that. So he says, you could say something further, that even Chochma, not Atzmus HaChochma, also is like Hiuli. When you compare it to Biy'a, this is all, what we spoke about is all Chochma and Atzilus. So obviously Chochma and Atzilus compared to Keser is already something that includes details. But the details are all Atzilus details. They're all on the level of Atzilus, because even Bina is also Bina of Atzilus. However, when you compare it to Biy'a, Chochma and Biy'a, and in Biy'a, then you could say that even Chochma itself and Atzilus, relative to Biy'a, is like Hiuli, and even more than that, even higher than Hiuli. Because Hiuli doesn't have details, but it's still the source to some extent of the details. Whereas Atzilus is further removed. So the point being here is that even Chochma of Atzilus, which is already a manifest Chochma, not just Atzmus Chochma, also has details. However, compared to Biy'a, you call it Hiuli. And therefore you have it all reconciled in two ways. Either it's Atzmus HaChochma, like I said, and Chochma, or Chochma of Atzilus compared to Chochma of Biy'a. That's the summation of this parentheses. And just, if you ask me, why didn't I get it on Friday? Well, that's the process of learning. You learn, you read it over slowly. Also, I wanted to see what he said earlier, and that obviously helped understand this parentheses. So I'm going to read now the whole parentheses inside, based on as I just explained it right now. So we'll have another chance. One second. We'll have another chance to review it as I read it now inside, and then I'll stop for any questions after I review the parentheses.
What you said that Atzmus HaChochma is Koyach HaMaskil.
Yeah. I said that, yeah. He says it here. He says it explicitly here. So here's the parentheses now. After saying that Chochma is like a koyach Hiuli, and that's why it's like Shemen, because there's Shemen in everything, fuel in everything. Chochma is that fuel, because Chochma is everything. God embedded Chochma into every part of existence, but an Eifon Kloli, and he calls it like a koyach Hiuli. Shememenu nibtzu. He doesn't say it includes all the details. From it is derived, from it comes out all the details. And we'll soon discuss this also in the context of Shemen. I have another thought that just came to me. Okay, I'll say it afterwards. Here's the parentheses. So first I had to find where's this in Isbar Le'il. I initially thought it was somewhere in volume 3. I don't think so. I haven't found it explicitly. There's some places maybe it hints to, but I found it explicitly in volume 2. And the pages, and it's in chapter 321, page 656 in the first edition of Ayin Beis, not the latest edition, as well as on page 1156. Is it 11? 1156 and 1177 and 78. So that's where he discusses and says the following: the nekudas ha-chochma eina k'ma Hiuli. There he says Chochma is not like Hiuli. Shari b'nekudas ha-chochma nimtza ha-protim. In the nekuda of Chochma, Chochma already has the details. Chochma is not just the potential for conceiving; it's actually has the details. However, they're concealed and they're not discernible yet. But there are details there. It's not just the power to conceive. Mashenkin Hiuli, but Hiuli, who she'ein by mitzias hapratim klal, as he discusses in those pages I just cited. There are no details yet, like I just explained. It's above details. It's the potential for that thing to happen. And now he says, and here's the answer in a way. And according to this, that Chochma is not Hiuli. Hiuli is higher than Chochma. Hiuli doesn't have details. You have to say, then you're referring to Atzmus HaChochma, not Chochma Gluya, not the conscious concept or idea that flashed in your mind. Then you're talking about the Keich HaMaskil, the power to conceive, the Makar HaSeichel, which is, like I said, the power to write, the power to speak, as an example. Meaning it doesn't have details yet. It's just the power to do so. It is Keich HaMaskil and not Keich HaMidis, like he explains in those pages that earlier. But it's still Keich HaMaskil. It's still Atzmus HaChochma. That would be Hiuli. But Chochma itself is not a Hiuli. And here comes but that's one explanation. The Efsher, and here's where the Rebbe Rashab says, however, you can say more than that. You can say even Chochma is also Hiuli, not just Atzmus HaChochma. The Efsher, the B'chinas HaChochma, Ima Yesh is a B'chinas Nekuda Legaba Sichlim, even though it's a Nekuda compared to the Sichlim, meaning a Nekuda that has the details. And what is that? Lamaila. The Kamoy Kain Lamaila. B'chinas Chochma Nekuda Legaba Kol Mashem Izgala Bebina. So Nekuda is a Kuda that has in it, compared to all that will reveal the Bina. So then, even though it has these details, however, in Hizel b'madregas Atzilus, that's all in Atzilus that has the details. But when you start thinking about how Chochma becomes a source for Chochma in the next level, but when you're talking, that's Chochma in Atzilus. God's wisdom in Atzilus has the details within it on the level of Atzilus. But when you think of Chochma as it becomes Bereshis, which means the beginning of everything that's created, so now we're not talking about Atzilus, we're talking about the beginning of Biy'a. You can say that relative in Atzilus, it's not like Hiuli, because it has the details. But relative to creation, it's like Hiuli. Because Biy'a, the creation, is infinitely distant from Atzilus. And based on that, you can say the B'chinas HaChochma, B'chinas Shlilim HaPratim. That Chochma of Atzilus negates details. Even more than Hiuli. So first he says it's like Hiuli, but then he says even more than that, because Hiuli, at the end of the day, is still relatable to what comes of it. But Atzilus to Biy'a is somewhat higher even than Hiuli compared to Biy'a again. Not compared to Keser, and not compared to Atzilus itself. And that's the parentheses. And the explanation why the Rebbe Rashab is insisting on these explanations, as I said, because it makes the interface a lot stronger, that Chochma has in it both Elikus and the details of creation. Yes, in some cases, depending what level it's Hiuli, in some cases it includes the Pratim. But it makes everything more compact and more, let's call it more progressive, more accessible. That the stepping stones that we always talk about, retracing the steps or the rungs of the ladder, get closer when you're able to see it from all these different angles. Where on one hand, it's not just Atzmus Chochma, but Chochma itself also has that. So remember, when Chochma creates Biy'a, Bereshis, and even though it's like a Hiuli or even higher than a Hiuli, but Chochma is already not Atzmus HaChochma anymore. So even though it's still not Atzilus, and compared to Biy'a, it's like it's more than it's like a Hiuli or even further than a Hiuli. But remember, through our Aveda, we're ultimately going to reconnect to Chochma and Atzilus, and from that into Keser, into Atzmus Chochma, and all the way back to Atzmus, to the highest levels before the Tzimtzum, as we've been learning. So it just makes this interface a lot more geschmacker, if you wish, a lot more more accessible. Okay, that's the parentheses, and I'll be happy to take any questions if there are any. To me, it's quite clear now.
Interesting
That's that.
Atzmus HaChochma, he's saying that Koyach HaMaskil is Atzmus HaChochma.
Why is that? That's everywhere Chassidus says that. I mean,
Atzmus
that's
HaChochma is the etzem of the Chochma. I don't know. I'm asking.
it's
Here he's saying no. It's a Koyach HaYudim.
for me. It's a everywhere. For me, it's many places Chassidus says exactly that. Atzmus HaChochma is not Atzmus Ein Sof. It's the Atzmus of Chochma is the Koyach HaMaskil, the source of Chochma. It's like saying Atzmus HaMidas. It's the Etzem HaKeyach, like Koyches Atzmim, or Atzmus HaKeyach. That's what it means. There's Koyches Gluyim, revealed faculties, Koyches Nelamim, concealed faculties, Koyches Hiulim, potential faculties, and there's Koyches Atzmim, and then there's Etzem Nesa Koyach, Nefesh Nesa Koyches. So Koyach HaMaskil is in the level of Atzmus HaChoch. Yeah. In some places it says Chachmis Timah. I believe on page 656 that I cited, chapter 321 in volume 2, I think he says it's Chachmis Timah, if I recall correctly. Which is
So
Chachmis
Chochma
Shebekesser.
means Koyach HaYuli, like he's saying here, Atzmus HaChochma.
That's what he's saying, yes. Yeah. Compared to Chachma Gluya in Atzilus. Basically, Chachma Shebekesser will become Keser Shebechachma and Chachma Gluya. Everything in Atzilus has a root in Keser. So Chachma Gluya, which is Chachma with Pratim, is rooted in Atzmus HaChachma or Koyach HaMaskil or Chachma Shebekesser, which is called Chachma Stima. Actually, now I recall another place here in volume 3 where he talked about that at length. But I don't think it relates to this, but I'll look it up anyway. Are there any questions or any comments, other comments or questions on this?
I came to the class a little late.
Is the Chochma Shebekesser not having the Koyach HaYuli for itself? The
What do you mean from itself?
Shebekesser.
God creates. What do you mean from itself?
No, higher.
God gave it its power.
Chochma is always coming. From where the power coming?
Koyach
Chochma
HaMaskil.
Shebekesser.
From God, from Hashem. What do you mean from where? Who created it? The Eibishter created a world. He created a structure. First he created...
Not who created it.
Sorry? Not
The
sure what
same
you're
way
asking.
that you have Chochma, no, the same way that you have Chochma in Atzilus, there is a Koyach HaMaskil. So
Koyach
Chochma
HaMaskil is
Shebekesser.
Chochma Shebekesser, as I explained. Chochma Stima Atzmus HaChochma.
My question is, if Chochma Shebekesser does not have a Koyach HaMaskil?
What you mean? Does the Koyach HaMaskil have a Koyach HaMaskil? You're asking me. I mean, does the Etzem HaNefesh have an Etzem HaNefesh? Does it have a source? Yeah, Chochma of Ak, and Chochma of Ak is rooted in Chochma of the Esses Rias HaGruzes. If you want to go all the way up, is that what you're asking?
Okay.
Yeah.
Can I just ask what's the practicable takeaway from this? And it's very ethereal.
I just gave the whole practical takeaway at length. I explained why it intensifies the interface. Were you here from the beginning of the class?
No, I wasn't. That's the problem.
Okay, so just go back on that. I explained it in detail.
Okay, sorry. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Are there any other questions? Okay, with that, let's just continue. We'll just continue. Just a moment. Just give me 1 second. I wanted to look up one thing. I don't even remember where it was. One minute, please. Hmm. Okay, I don't find what I'm looking for. I'll look for it later. Sorry about that. Oh, I did find it. 1 second.
Rabbi Jacobson, in what I wrote to you on Friday after Friday, is there any relationship between what I wrote and what you just gave over, or what I wrote was just way off?
I don't know if I saw. What did you write? I don't remember seeing what you wrote.
I don't want to. I don't want to derail the class over that.
Okay.
I'll do that.
I'll look at
offline.
it later. I'll look at it later.
Okay.
I'll look at it later. I'll tell you. You put it on the group or to me privately?
No, to you privately.
Okay, I'll look at it later. I'll let you know. Okay, so let's continue now. The line Valkein behechlech on page 1463. It's like a little more than halfway down the page, 2/3 down the page or something like that. And the pages can be found at ayinbeis.com. So he says, Valkein, now that we've established that Chochma exists within everything, Valkein behechlech shebchinas hakoyach hachochma nimtze b'chol davar. So the discussion till now was how close Chochma is to Kol Dover, to everything that exists. Is it Hiuli? Does it have the details? And the Rebbe Rashab, as I said, explained it in two ways. There's either two levels, Atzmus HaChochma and Chochma Gluya, or even there's Chochma Vatzilus compared to Chochma Biy'a. But regardless, either way, there's Chochma within everything because Bereishis Bara Lakim, Bereishis B'Chochmasa, Kulam B'Chochma Sisa. So basically, God's wisdom is embedded in everything in existence. So if you're able to dissect anything, you find God's wisdom in there. And we're going to soon learn that's the Shemen within everything. And I do like the idea, the more I'm thinking about it, with translating Shemen not as oil, but also as fuel, which will make it easier to understand what he said, there's Shemen in everything. Because everything can be turned into fuel to some extent. Maybe it's actually Shemen too, but the discussion we had a few days ago about that. But regardless, the point is there's Chochma within everything. And the Rebbe Rashab now continues to explain it even further. Back to what we said before. Because Chochma is not a koyach prati. Even if you're going to explain that Chochma has the details within it, it still doesn't mean that the details are revealed. It's still a koyach klali. You still need Bina to flesh out the details. However, Chochma has them already in a concealed way, or in a Hiuli way. But bottom line, it's a koyach klali no matter what. Like we said before, Bereishis nami maimerhu. Bereishis is a maimer klali. Bereishis, when you say God created heaven and earth, Bereishis, what are we talking about? We're talking about light? We're talking about the heavens? Are we talking about vegetation? We're talking about the celestial bodies, sun and the moon, the stars, the fish, the birds, the animals, the human being. Those I just spelled out are the Asar Ma'amaris in specifics. Bereshis bara Elokim is a maimer kloli. That's Chochma. Bereshis is b'Chochma. Bereshis is b'Chochmasa. So Chochma is a koyach kloli. Being a koyach kloli, that's why it exists in everything, because everything comes from that koyach kloli. And now he's going to explain. The specific creations, because the other the detailed creation, whether it's light on day 1, or it's the Hirakia on day 2, or the Tesi Eres Desha vegetation on day 3, etc., those are specific creations. There Hashem said specifically, Yehi Oir. He didn't say Yehi Desha, he didn't say Yehi Rakia, it's Oir. So those Protei and Nevroim, what gave them that shape and form that they have? Bereshis alone is not enough, because Chochma alone is too closed. It has to come into details. In other words, in a sense, the other days, the days of creation actually drew down, extracted from the Kloli, from the Hiuli, or from the Koyach Kloli of Chochma, I should say, the details. And what do those details comprise of? Every detail comes from a specific sphera. He doesn't spell it out, but for example, Oyer is usually connected to Chesed. That's why the 6 days of creation. Rikia is Gvura. Vegetation, Tiferes, Yem Shlishi. The Yem Revi is the Netzach. Yem Chamishi, what was created Yem Chamishi, the animals, is Hoid. And Erev Shabbos, the 6 days, Yesod. Then comes Shabbos is Malchus. So there, every creation is associated with this particular sphere. And then, you don't have to say that in day 2 of creation, for example, in the Kia, it has another sphere called Tiferes. No, Gvura is associated with day 2. Obviously, there's Iskalulus in all the spheres. It's not talking about that. But you don't have to say that there's Chesed and Gvura or Bina and all the other spheres in every creation. Aval B'chinas HaChochma, Chochma is different, because Chochma is the only sphere, the first of the 10 spheres that emanated, was Netzal as a Koyach Kloli, like Bereshis, Shu Koyach Kloli Canal, Behechler Sheyimtze B'chol Nivra. Being a Koyach Kloli, it is found in every creation. So the Rebbe Rashab is coming to answer, in a way, a question. Why can't you say there's a sphere, every sphere, not just Chochma, not just Shemen, every sphere exists in everything? It's not the case, because the spheres pratis don't have that koyach kloli. Chochma, like, let's talk seichel. When you conceive of an idea, or even an idea that will become an emotion, a feeling, in Chochma it's all encompassed like a seed. It's all concentrated there. Whether it's a level of Hiuli compared to Biy'a, however you explain it, but bottom line, it's a koyach kloli, no matter what. That's how Hashem created the world. He didn't create the world in separate days, as separate entities before he first created one, you can call it one nucleus, one nebulous nucleus from which he would then extract all of creation. That's the way Hashem made it, like a klal taprat. And that's Chochma. So that Chochma has to be everywhere, because that's the klal, that's called the koyach kloli. Now, why is this so important? I go back to what I said earlier about the interface. This is critical, because let's for a second think hypothetically. Let's say God said, look, Yesh Ma'ayin is anyway an infinite leap from Ayin to Yesh. So I should just create details. Why do I have to create one general picture, one concentrated seed? Let it all begin with details. Poof, God said, let there be creation. Or you want to create it in 6 days, let it be 6 days. Etc. Why did he have to create a klal in the first place? Or put it more in scientific terms, why can't we just be born with like Adam and Chava? They didn't go through pregnancy and development. They were born at 20 years old, fully developed adults. Why do we have to go through the process of conception of a seed fertilizing an egg? And that in turn creates a conception if God chooses to add the soul, and therefore now there's one cell that has been conceived. And that cell will then split into 2. And those 2 will split into 4, and then into 8 and 16 and 32 and 64 and 128, etc., etc. and it will take a first trimester and a second and a third and 9 months. Now you have a fully developed child. Why the need for all these steps? The answer is because the Eibishter wanted number one, create creation in a way that makes sense to us. He didn't need all that. The Eibishter could have said, Bereshis bara Elokim, and you have a whole world. Didn't even need 6 days. Like the simple equation. If those that can't create in 6,000 days or 6 million days. And someone who can create it all in 1 second. So why did the Eibishter need 6 days? Why did he have to do it in this way? Because he wanted, number one, that we should make sense to us. In the seichel that he created us, then this type of seichel makes it, then it's not just a magic, it's not just koyach hamafilasis, it's not just kol yachol. God can do anything he wants, like we've discussed many times, because he wants us to relate to it. He wants us to understand him. So he created seichel, and he created a logical seichel. You could ask, why did he create seichel this way and not that way? That the Alter Rebbe says in some Maimonim, it talks about, that's how God chose. That we don't have an answer for. But once he created a seichel, the way seichel is right now, this is the words of the Alter Rebbe, then everything possible that it can make sense, he makes sense. Things are done in a seichel-dika way. And what's a seichel-dika way? That first a klal, then a prat. That makes sense to us. The second point, which maybe is equally or even more important, is the avodas Hashem shebezeh. That once we understand it, now we can retrace the steps. Remember, we cannot replicate God's kol yachol. Only God creates. How do we, down below, where we're involved in details, and the whole fragmentation of existence and the multitudes of existence, how do we reconnect to Achdus Hashem? If Hashem Echad is all the way in his domain, and we live in a world that is filled with diversity and multiplicity, etc., how is there connection? So God created a process, stepping stones. First start with the prat. From the prat, come to the next prat. And you start climbing and climbing, and from a prat, from several pratim, you make a klal. And from several klolim, you make a bigger klal. And slowly, you make your way back to understand that from Malchus, and then Yesod, backwards, Hoid, Netzach, Teferes, Gvura, Chesed, we go all the way back to Chochma, where Chochma encompasses it all. And from Chochma becomes a bridge to Keser. And Keser to higher and higher. So you have number one, a logical process, Mamay Lamata, in the process of creation, and also a logical process that we can relate to on our terms, Mamata Lamayla, step by step by step. And we make our way not just from a prat to another prat, all the way to the klal. And the klal opens us up to even a bigger klal, all the way back to the highest levels, as we've been learning when we discuss Kol HaMayrich Be'echad. So Echad too is that way. What is Echad? The Aleph of Hashem is Achdus, but the Ches is 7 heavens and the earth, Shiva Rekim Ba'aretz, and Daled Ruchas Elam, the 4 directions. So we take the structure of 4 directions, east, west, north, and south, the 7 and 8, the 8 of Ches, which is heaven, and the 7 heavens and earth, and connect it to the Aleph. In a sense, the Aleph in this case would be like Chochma, the Klal. Ches and Dal would be the Pratim. So everything is structured in a way that we have a commensurate level. Imagine trying to climb a ladder without rungs, or the highest rung is so high you can't reach it. Here Hashem made it in rungs, stepping stones, which make it possible for us to go. That's why we say b'chol levavcha, b'chol nafshecha, b'chol meidecha, mutfa, murgish, muskel. We don't begin right away expecting us to know kol ha-Torah kula. You start first. You teach a child Torah tziva lanu Moshe, Ayin Beis, Torah tziva lanu Moshe, b'chamesh lemikra, b'nesel lemishnah, b'chamesh esel legemara, and slowly we grow step by step by step. So we go from the prat to the klal, which also, if you think about it as a good education system, you teach a child Ayin Beis, you're teaching them detail, teaching them letters. What do they know from letters? But those letters are going to become words one day. And those words will become sentences. And sentences will become paragraphs. And paragraphs will become chapters. And chapters will become entire volumes. And volumes all are part of a larger knowledge. So basically, prat to klal. Like the Frierdiker Rebbe. The Rebbe often was fondly quote the Frierdiker Rebbe saying that the whole Torah is included in the 10 Commandments. The 10 Commandments are included in the Anochi Hashem Elokecha. Anochi Hashem Lekecha is included in the word Anochi. And the whole Anochi is included in the Aleph. So when you teach a child, come it's Aleph, Anochi, Aleph, it has all the pratim in it, like here. Like the Chochma, that includes everything. Then comes the breakdown. So you have it both directions. The klal has all the pratim within it, and the pratim lead you back to the klal, and therefore the interface becomes such a eloquent one, because you have everything covered. We can relate to it because the details are in our terms, and the details have brought us to the bigger picture. And then, of course, it brings us to the bigger picture. So Chochma plays a central role because it's that in-between place where Bereshis, Bara Lakim, the Eibishter took all this Chochma and said, I'm going to create existence. No details yet. It has in it all the details. And then I'll break it down into details. So in each of the detailed creation, you don't have to say there's Bina in everything, there's Das in everything, there's Chesed in everything, but Chochma is in everything. This is in addition to the scholars that Sridhar have, which is not relevant to our discussion here. Here, the main point is that there's a Chochma within everything in existence. So this parentheses, even though it seems somewhat like splitting hairs initially, I mean, God forbid to say that, but the meaning, it seems like it just seemed technical, is actually not so technical. It helps us understand this interface in a far more deeper way. Okay. I hope that was helpful. So there we go. That's the end of the second parentheses. Any questions on what I've just elaborated upon?
Chochmasa.
B'chuchmasa, yeah. Bereshis b'chuchmasa.
At the time of Yerushalmi, not Yonas Amelazir, I checked.
Okay.
And the purpose of this embedding of Chochma, the general, the cloud, in everything is ultimately to reveal Atzmus or Chochma. It seems like the point is to reveal Atzmus.
Whose Chochma is this? Is God's Chochma.
Obviously. But where does that get you? Isn't the goal ultimately a revelation of...
Yeah, but that's not what he's discussing here. He's discussing Chochma. Chochma, once you know God's wisdom, that it's all God's wisdom, then obviously God's wisdom, as we've learned, Hu v'Chochma se echad, the wisdom leads you into Keser. And then from Keser, like we learned, I referred to it before. From Keser, from Chochma, we go into Keser. Keser leads us to Ak, to the Kav, to the Tzimtzum, before the Tzimtzum. That's the process. So you're climbing the ladder.
I see. Thank you.
Isn't there also God created a second system, like, don't we say, like in tshuva, that a person can acquire his world in one moment? The story, the Rebbe always talks about somebody on a chuppah can become a tzaddik gamor in one moment. Isn't there also built into the system an instantaneous? A person comes down to this life. Baal Shem Tov says to just do one tova for another Jew. How does that relate to this system of this?
So how would you answer? Do you have any way of answering it yourself?
I think it's a short way and a long way.
Yeah, but there's another point. Is it about tshuva potter from mitzvahs?
No, of course not.
So because he wandered off the path, whether deliberately or not deliberately, a tinik shenishba, so God is giving him a way to so-called jumpstart the system. But it's like a sick person in a coma, and the only way to get them to wake up is through a massive dose of drugs. So tshuva is like a type of shock treatment, so to speak, to the neshama. But then once the wake up is there, the person begins to learn Torah and be Mekayim mitzvahs and starts joining this whole process. Just two different ways, maybe, because he went the other direction. So number one is everyone's expected to be a tzaddik, meaning to do the best they can. For whatever reason, a person has not been that way, either, as I said, deliberately or not deliberately. So tshuva is a tool that God gave us, yes, to be able to reconnect even after a rupture or a disconnect or the ignorance. But then we all become part of this process and system of davening 3 times a day, and all the Yom Tevim, and climbing from Asiya to Biy'a to Yisira to Biy'a to Atzilus. And even when you talk about Rabbi Lezer ben Daya that you referred to, that he was kind of Elame bin Bashar Achas. He says there was no sin on earth that he did not transgress. But then he recognized and realized, and he bent down and he cried out. And with that one cry, he was able to correct or reclaim. But even there, that Rizal explains, but that doesn't still explain how does he then appreciate Torah? He didn't learn Torah. So he needs to still have mitzvahs and Torah, and that's why that's a whole explanation of how he gained that. Because the bottom line is, so because a person did total tshuva doesn't suddenly mean they have an automatic download of Kol HaTorah Kul. They still need to learn. So there's a whole bunch of levushim that they gain from Torah mitzvahs, and they still have to become part of that process. So that's the brief answer. And there's more to say on this topic, of course.
He was a gilbul from Yechanan Chaim Godel.
That's what that Izal says. Yeah, and therefore he took his levushim, correct. I didn't want to go into the details, but that's the point, yeah.
What about Biy'a? Only Chochma is the koyach, which is the Reishis is Chochma, the Chochma, so Biy'a not is included in that?
Absolutely not. Biy'a is details. Biy'a is already the breakdown of Chochma into details. But Reishis is B'Chochma, it doesn't say Biy'a. Okay. So now the final few lines in this paragraph, he says, V'hainu, oh, actually, I actually skipped a line. I said it Baal Peh, but I didn't read it inside. When he said, Kol Pratei Nereim, Pratei Amadei, he says, Kamoi Oirum B'chinas HaChesed. I said it for some reason, I thought it didn't say it here. V'Rekiyom B'chinas HaGvura, I just did not read that line. Maybe you didn't notice because I just said it, Baal Peh. But I'm realizing I didn't read that line. Okay. So now, after the parentheses, he says like this, V'hainu, madreges protis mebchinas hachochme shenimtze beproti kol hanimtzayim. So there's a koyach chochma within everything that exists, meaning that the specific detailed levels, they come from the level of Chochma that is found in each of existence. So in other words, first it began with everything is in a general klal of Chochma, and then the specific levels draw from Chochma, which exists in everything. V'zeu hashemen, and this is the oil or the fuel, hanimtze, that's the fuel and oil that is found in everything that exists. That's the b'chinas hachochma shayach el eshe hametzias befrat. So the fact that we find fuel or oil in everything that's the nekudas hachochma. That's the chochma that is connected to that specific existing entity. So first it all begins within chochma. That chochma is embedded in everything that exists. So in everything that exists, there's a chochma. That's the shemen that you find in everything, the fuel. So the physical fact that everything in physical existence has shemen, however we explain that, means it's the shemen, the chochma of Hashem that is shaykh to that specific entity. So everything has shemen, everything has chochma. V'zeu shemen. And now he adds, what is the shemen? Shemen is not just a substance. When you say the oil of something, the oil, it's not just the oil. The oil is the preferred, or there's a word, the quality element, hamufcher, in that particular item. So, for example, when you take oil from a olive, you discard the shell, and you say the oil is like the essence of the olive. So Shemen in other places in Chassidus it says Shmini Atzeres, that Shmini is from the word Shemen, essence it's called. Like when you say the essence, in Yiddish there's a word essence, but you also find it even in English. You sometimes say the essence is referred to oil. the essence of something. They connect it to the oil of the object. See, Shemen is the Techis HaPnimis, the inner dimension Hamufcher. Hamufcher is the most precious part, or the most valuable part. Mufcher would be the most, think of what other word you can use.
Select, literally, select.
Okay, so most select Shebedavar Ahu, in that object. V'hainu shu koyach hachochma shebe'esei hadavar shu ha'moker. So that means is the power of Chochma in that thing, which is the moker, because everything starts with Bereshis, with the Chochma, which is the source for everything. So what he's saying here is that everything in existence is already primed and ready to unleash the power of Chochma of Hashem, within it. So in a sense, when you draw oil from anything, you're revealing the Chochmas of Hashem that's within it, which is its primary, select, or preferred, or highest grade. Maybe that's another word, the high grade element of that entity. So you see this whenever they talk about, for example, when they talk about oil excavation. Is that what it's called? When you're drawing oil from discovering oil. So the key thing is the key technology is not just to draw the oil, is how to take the oil from out wherever it's embedded and make sure that it's as pure as possible. So they call it the whole purification process of discarding, so to speak, the shards or the shells, or the to distill it is maybe the right words. Distilleries that take the best oil out of it. Even when you go to a gas pump, they often offer you three different levels of grade, three grades, right? Regular, I don't know, the second I forgot the name, and premium. These are all pure and pure oil. So oil, in its purest form, is the purest part of any particular thing. Basically saying that oil is the best part of it, which is like in this case the chochma within it. That's what the ruchnius of it. So you have here a whole chassidus applied to oil and fuel. And indeed, oil that is has too much sediment in it will not function quite the same way. If you use oil that's full of sediment, the candle is not going to burn well, and your car is not going to drive well. I don't know if I can compare the two, but the same idea. Okay, so this is a deeper explanation this is a more elaborate explanation, I should say, in Shemen and Chochma, but we still haven't gotten back to what does it mean in the context of Ner Hashem Nishma Sodom. And now we're going to continue and explain that there's different levels of oil. But let me stop again for any questions.
There is also the concept, the similar, Bisro Shmeino, the Torah. The Shmeino is the Shemen, the essence.
Yeah.
Or this year, I don't know how many times we read Shmini this year, 8 times? There is a saying.
This year it's 8 times? Could be.
So it's saying Shmini, Shmeino, Shmeino. When you're reading Shmini 8 times, then it's a Shmeino, Shemen, a year, a satisfied year.
Shuman, like Shemen, Shuman. I think the Rebbe brings from one of the Polish Svarim that when you reach Shmini Pamim, it's going to be a year that is Shaman or Meshuman.
Yeah.
A rich. When you say Shuman, also means rich, and say that, yeah, like
Ichlo mashmanim, Nechemyo. Ichlo mashmanim.
yeah, mashmanim is like fatty foods.
Yeah,
like, in a positive way, obviously. Rich foods. Yeah. That's all connected. That's all connected to Shemen being hamufcher in anything. Yeah.
As a result of what you just said, if I can add one more point, how Chochma connected to the stem cells. If any cell has Chochma or oil or Shemen, that means we can reach to the upgrade, the best version of that cell. There is the stem cells begin.
Yeah, you probably can connect it to that.
I would also think that this discussion relates to the Rebbe's Sefer on the essence of Chassidus. It's my understanding there that the Rebbe is saying that Chassidus is not a fifth, it's not pardes, it's not one of the four, but it's the essence of each of those levels.
He actually says there that it's
Yeah.
Shemen Shebetera, Shemen,
Right.
oil within Torah is rosin de rosin, even deeper than yayin, even deeper than wine. He says that explicitly there, talking about Hanukkah.
Is this the Alter Rebbe or the Rebbe?
This is the Rebbe's famous essay called. It's called Kuntus in Yonoshal Teres Achsidis. And just for the record, I just want to mention as a side, when the Rebbe edited, he crossed out the word muhusa. They called it Kuntus Muhusa Shal Teres Achsidis, which means the essence. So I think when they translated into English, they didn't know that, so they called it the essence. But the Rebbe actually called it inyana, the idea, the concept of Chassidus, not the essence of Chassidus. Just as an aside. But regarding there, he says clearly that Chassidus, Pnimis HaTorah, is Shemen Shebetera for this reason. Yeah.
So there, in that sefer, right, the Rebbe writes that it's not a separate sphera or a separate world, a separate level, but
It's the
it's the
Shemen
premise
within
of each
everything.
other.
Yeah.
So here in our discussion here, this level that you're talking about in Chochma of Atzilus, it's the Atzmus of its Chochma that we're talking about. That
Not
permeates
necessarily.
everything.
It's the Atzmus of the. He didn't. No, it's not Atzmus Chochma. It's Chochma is the core of is the mucker of everything. Not called. He didn't use the word Atzmus here. The mufcher, the best, the purest, the select, most select, the highest grade.
How does that relate to what? As if I remember learning the Rebbe Sefer. If I recall properly, it was that it's not its own independent. It's something that permeates everything. Like, wouldn't that mean that Chochma? It shouldn't be Chochma as a sphere itself.
I'd
That's
have to see it inside. I
embedded?
don't think anything that's said there contradicts this. If you could look inside and find an expression that I don't remember anything there that is different than what it says here.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'd have to see inside what you mean. Shemen is the deeper part, like an oil, like oil of anything. It's not the obvious core, it's oil is within something. Is the oil within an olive, or the oil within corn, or within any object, even in avonim, like he said, that you can extract fuel from it. There are many aspects to oil. The Rebbe Rashab is not doing a thorough analysis on Shemen here. What he's doing is explaining Shemen as Chochma, and like Chochma is the klal within everything that exists within everything, Shemen exists within everything. That's the Shemen within everything. Okay. Let's see here. So I'll continue. Any other questions? So now in Shemen itself, we find levels. There's Shemen that's used in the Beis HaMikdash, and they also have Shemen that's used in plain, like I said, you can use oil to fuel your home, to bring heat into your home, or oil for other purposes that are not necessarily Kedusha. So he says, V'yesh Shemen HaTov. This next section is actually the language of the Tzemach Tzedek, his gloss, his note on the Maimer and Magbiy'a L'Shevis of the Alter Rebbe. So he says like this: the Shemen HaTov, the pasuk says, fine oil. Sheyorad al Zoken Aaron is the expression. It's referring to oil and Shemen HaMishcha, anointment oil. The oil used in the Beis HaMikdash, one was to either the Shemen that was used in the menorah, or the Shemen that was used to anoint a kohen or a king. So Shemen was used to anoint. That's Shemen HaMishcha. Shemen was also used in the Shemen Simei Meluyim, when they anointed and they dedicated the temple, the Mishkan. Shemen is also used. Shemen is a sacred, has a sacred element to it. V'hu Chochma de Kedusha. Since Shemen is Chochma, So this type of shemen that's used for holy purposes in the sacred duties in the Mishkan and so on, that's called Chochma of Kedusha. Shebes Eshes Spheres Selyenus. The Chochma of Kedusha that is found in all the Eshes spheres, like we said, Chochma is in all the spheres. Kedusha. Aval Shar Ashmonim, but there's also regular shemen. Shemen that was not designated. For example, the story of Hanukkah. They found oil. The problem was the oil was desecrated. And the miracle was to find one cruse of oil that was not touched by them. That was with the seal of the Kohen Gadol to know it was not desecrated. That means shemen has to be protected. But there is oil. But they didn't want to use an impure oil. But there is the concept of shar ashmanim, other oils. Heim chochma de nega. So other oils that we find, that's called chochma of nega. Remember, nega is short for Kelipas nega. Literally, the word nega means bright, to shine, because it's referring to in contrast to sholosh Kelipas atmeis, which are 3 heavy husks that conceal, like think of a coconut, or a plain nut, a walnut, or a filbert, and so on. Shell like an olive, the olive has a membrane, or a grape, they're called more Kelipas nega. That means they're transparent. You can see through them. You can see the fruit inside. So a hard nut resembles a much harsher klippa. And a more soft klippa, a softer shell, is called Kelipas nega. It means it's still klippa, but it's a klippa that is not off limits. It's not osher b'dei chetzenim. You're allowed to use it. Basically, all divrei reshus is Kelipas nega, as the Alter Rebbe explains in chapter 6 in Tanya. So all other oils are more reshus, meaning they're not kedusha, chochma de kedusha. They are chochma from the world of nogeh. So it means a chochma that's already connected with a shell of existence. Afila shemen zayis. We're not talking about now shemen zayis zach that was used in the Beis Hamikdash, designated for the menorah. Afila shemen zayis, even olive oil. In other words, there's other oil. Hunilkach mebchinas nega. That's taken also from the level of nega. Shahadi Omer Azal, and he's now going to explain this further. This again is all from the Tzemach Tzedek. Like Razal say, the sages tell us, the Hazayis mishachich talmudei shel ayin shana. The Gemara tells us you shouldn't eat olives alone. That's why we always eat olives. We eat them with some oil, not a dry olive that's completely without any oil. Like, take an olive, let's say you compress it or dry it. We're supposed to avoid that. Why? Because it makes you forget your studies of 70 years. An olive. L'cheira, an olive is not treif, it's not non-kosher. There's no such a thing as a non-kosher vegetable. So why does an olive make you forget? Because it's klipa. Shashikha himokim klipa. This place of klipa. When you forget, forgetfulness comes from klipa. It says, Ein shikha lifnei kisei kvedecha. The idea of forgetfulness is a result of some type of separation, some type of disconnection, dissonance. Zikaron is a mitzvah actually because it connects you. You remember. So shikha is connected to something from nega, from klipa. The shemen zayis shemachzeh talmudei shel ayin shama. But the Gemara continues that it's true. A zayis makes you forget, but shemen zayis makes you remember the study of 70 years. Zeu lefishu birur shenisbarim b'chinas hazayis, because the shemen is already a birur, is the oil within the olive, shenisbarim, that is extracted from or refined from or separated from the olive. In other words, it represents somebody who's capable of refining and elevating the klipa of zayis. So what is he proving from this? This again, all from the Tzemach Tzedek, that there's a concept of shemen zayis that comes from klipa. Now, if someone who knows how to elevate it, then great. But if not, you could have a zayis that's meshakich shikha that's connected to klipa. Aval al koponim. Now, why the Tzemach Tzedek brings this needs explanation, but the Rebbe Rashab is quoting him. Aval al koponim hu nilkach mebchinas klikas nega. Bottom line, it's relevant to us here, is that there is a concept of shemen, oil, that's not Kedusha, that's Chochma from Kelipas nega. So the Rebbe Rashab is bringing a little more details about all of this, and all this is coming to explain how the shemen, the oil in Ner Hashem Nishma Sodom, and the Ner is going to be the shemen of the Nefesh Habamis. Now, why it needs to be elaborated, I think is obvious, because you think of oil, without any explanation, oil sounds like a very positive thing. So you're saying the wick is the Nefesh Halikis, and the oil is the Nefesh Habamis. Initially, when you hear that for the first time, it sounds a little counterintuitive. You think the wick, which is just an inanimate piece of cloth or cotton or whatever it may be, is more material, and the fuel sounds more sublime. So I think that may be part of why he's explaining it this way. Because in other places, as I pointed out, the wick is sometimes compared to the body and the animal soul, and the flame is compared to the neshama. But in this Maimer Magbila Shevis of the Alter Rebbe, he's explaining it that the wick is the divine soul, and the shemen is the nefesh habamis. So it could be this whole explanation is coming to understand how do you explain that. So by saying shemen is chochma, and there's chochma of Kedusha, but there's also chochma of klipa. That's the shemen of the nefesh habamis. I think that's why he's elaborating. That would be my speculation. I can't say for sure, but it sounds like that to me. Now comes a parenthesis. It's a little Kabbalistic. I'll just read it. Says, but Mishnah's Chassidim is from a Makubal, one of the students of the Arizal. He's also the Mechaber of Yeshua Levov. His name was the Mechaber of Mishnah's Chassidim for some reason. Not Emmanuel Chayreki. Yeah, Emmanuel Chayreki, yeah. I think his name is Emmanuel. No, Chayreki is Emmanuel Chayreki is the Mechaber of Mishnah Chassidim. He was an Italian Makubal. In Masechta Mitzvah Shabbos, he breaks the Sefer into like time periods. Masechta Shabbos, there's a Masechta Mitzvah Shabbos, where he talks about Perek Vov, chapter 6, Mishnah Tes. He breaks into Prakim and Mishnahs. V'zel Shene. This is his exact citation. V'im yechel zeisim, if you eat olives, yechavim b'misper zayis, you should think of the misper zayis, which is 417, which is the misper zayis, corresponds shehu keil elikim v'havaya b'chiluf ad bash. It's the same number as the three names of Hashem, Keil, Elikim, and Havaya, in the Chiluf of Ad Bash. Chiluf is one of the ways the Hebrew alphabet is interpreted. And the Alter Rebbe, for example, brings the Shar Yichud V'Amunah. He says God created the whole world, Basar Mamoris, but also not all objects in existence, like Evan, for example, is not mentioned in the Asar Mamoris. So he says, b'chilufim, tmures, gematrias, and so on. A chiluf is a certain way. The Hebrew alphabet has many complex ways to understand it. One of them is gematria, everybody knows, is basically the numerical equivalent. Chiluf is that the alphabet can also, Aleph Beis can also be at bash, is where the Aleph replaces the Tov, at, and bash and Beis is instead of the shin. You're basically replacing the first and the 22nd letter, the second and the 21st letter. So it's called a chiluf. A chiluf is a transfer. So it's another way. So when you take, let's say, kale, the shem kale, that would be the equivalent of taking aleph tov. Tov is 400. And lamed, I think, is with chav, 420, or lamed, or ben, 400. Yeah, whatever the number is. So basically, when you take kale elikim and avaya, and you transfer it with chiluf of ad bash, he says it's the gematria of Zayis, which is 417. So he's giving a trick, so to speak, a method. Let's not call it a trick. That when someone eats Zaysim, if they're mechaven to the gematria of Zayis, which is Kel Avaya, Kel Elikim Avaya Bechiluf Atbash, then he will not come to forgetfulness al yodei, by eating the Zaisim, Ela Ya'ilulai. But on the contrary, they will help him. So it's an interesting way of looking at it. In other words, there's a method that you could tap into an olive and draw out Kedusha, rather not forgetfulness, but remembering. Similar to what the Gemara itself says when you do it through Shemen Zayis. But now he's saying either in eating Zaysim if you mechaven. Now why he brings this, I don't know. Not sure what he's coming to add. It sounds to me he wants to explain that you could, with an effort, you could be mevarer. So it could be he's setting the stage because we could be mevarer the oil of the animal soul, just like we can be mevarer the oil of the zayis that can be in the world of klipa shikha, could also be mevarer the oil of the animal soul. I'm assuming that's why he brings it here. Then he continues, and I'll read 2 more lines and we'll stop. Now let's get it back to our topic. And from this level of Chochma of Nogeh, not Chochma of Kedusha, which is Shemen HaTev and Shemen HaMishcha, the sacred oil, from this Chochma of Nogeh, Hu HaSeichel HaAnushi, this is where human intelligence, remember we also have Chochma, Sheyesh B'Teva HaAnushis, that's there in a natural human being, B'chol Adam, in every person, U'mezehu Gam Kein HaSeichel D'Nefesh HaBamis. And from this originates also the intelligence of the animal soul. So the fact that the animal soul has chochmah means it's the chochmah from which God used to create, but this is already the shemen within the klipa of Nogeh. In this case, the animal soul has chochmah. Now that chochmah could be used for its own self-interest, as we'll learn, or you could harness it and mibavar it and elevate it to become part of the fire and flame of the divine soul, as he's going to explain. So all this is a whole long introduction to explain what is Shemen, to bring us back to understand the Shemen of the Nefesh HaBamis. So relatively for Ayin Beis, especially in volume 3, this is pretty elaborate, but that's the Nekuda here. The bottom line is to come to explain how Shemen, in the context of a ner, of the wick, and the fuel, the oil here is talking about the nefesh habamis, that will then be turned into fuel for the nefesh alikis through our Aveda, which is going to be the next. We're going to learn that in the next page. I'm going to stop here. Any questions?
I'm trying to understand how you.
Clear. The whole entire idea here, we understand Shemen HaTev, Shemen HaMishcha, Chochma the Kedusha, Sha'ar Shmonim is the Chochma the Nogeh, is that Peshakeach Talmudei, Maskir Talmudei, Tzarich Levarer. The idea we understand, but there is something more to it, no?
I gave the best I have right now.
I don't understand the jump from this explanation of what is Shemen, and how does it relate to Chochma, to jumping to the human intellect. He could have jumped to anything. I don't understand that leap, the final leap.
Of course it could jump to everything, but it could also jump to the intellect of the animal soul. Where does it get its Chochma? The animal soul has wisdom, not just the divine soul. Where does it come from? So this explains it's coming from Chochma of Nogeh, which is the Shemen of Nogeh, and that's its root. In the Chanami, there's Shemen in everything. But that's all the background. That's what I said. He elaborated to give us background and context.
So he's explaining how does the human intellect not just become transformed in Elokus, but it dafka is comprised of it in its essence.
First, he wants to explain why it's called Shemen. Why is the animal soul, Chochma, the wisdom of the animal soul, called oil? That's the first step. Then we're going to learn about the transformation. There may be more to Rab Shlomo, I can't tell you. Right now, to me, it sounds like he's giving background. So because as we're going to learn further, there'll be a whole process of how we take the wisdom or the intelligence of the animal soul and turn it into fuel for Elokus. So that's why I think he's bringing this whole thing with the Shemen of Nogeh, because it's a birur. It's basically an Aveda, just like all Avedas are birurim. Here, the birur is going to be of the Nefesh Habamis, the Shemen of the Nefesh Habamis. So I think this whole thing with the Zayis and then the Mishnah Chassidim is all showing us that there's a process of birur. You take something that in its raw form is still Kelipas Nogeh, just like eating a piece of food, kosher food, and you have to eat it l'shem shemayim. So the same thing is going to be, how do you take the intelligence of the animal soul, which is driven for self-interest? It's an explanation of the Torah that says that, and then how you transform that and harness it into V'ahavtas Hashem Elokecha b'chol levavcha b'shnei tzorach and Ava Kedish Be'esh, the fiery flame of divine love. That is my understanding of the context of the details, why he's bringing all these details. Okay? Yeah. Okay, so we'll stop here. Bottom of page 1463. Still a little more. He wants to talk about Shemen, but the next page starts the avodah of it. The whole, it's quoting the Mittler Rebbe's Maimer. This is a whole. It's going to go now 2.5 pages about Ner Hashem Nishmas Sodom, and then it's going to go back to Ner Mitzvah, which he doesn't answer the question, but mostly going to start the contemplation in Shema that leads to this Ava B'chol Levavcha. Okay, we'll learn it all. We'll get there. So I'll stop here, end of page of 1463, right?